took on a new dimension. Paint Creek and Cabin Creek, two small streams that flow into the Kanawha River about 12 miles east of Charleston, the state's capital. Most of the mines in this area, except for those along Cabin Creek, had been unionized by 1912. The total population of both areas, including miners and their families, approached 35,000. Living conditions, according to a later Senate investigative subcommittee, were shocking. This was the setting for what would become a violent 20-year struggle.
The contract between the United Mine Workers and the coal operators of Paint Creek expired in April of 1912, and efforts to renegotiate a contract failed. When that happened, the miners went out on strike, and the coal operators began making plans to operate without them.
The Paint Creek strike spread quickly to nearby Cabin Creek, where all but a few of the coal mines at the mouth of the hollow operated on a non-union basis. The coal miners on Cabin Creek demanded several things of the operators. First of all, of course, they wanted union recognition. Secondly, they wanted the right to make sure that they got fair treatment in terms of the payment of coal. So they demanded a check weighman who would check the company's weight of the coal and give them a fair shake. They also demanded the right of free assembly so that they could have speeches, they could work politically and economically to prove their own interests. They also wanted the right to be able to trade at any store in the area without any punishment. They also wanted the right to have a 9-hour day, and they wanted the safety laws of the state enforced.
When the miners of Paint Creek and Cabin Creek combined forces, that meant there were more than 15,000 miners on strike in central West Virginia. The coal operators, too, joined forces in an association which now looked upon the strike as of far greater importance, far more critical to the total future of the coal industry in southern West Virginia, in the state, and in the southern Appalachians.
Reacting harshly and without hesitation, the coal operators brought in more Baldwin Felts agents. The number along both creeks rose to more than 300. Their job was to evict all striking miners and their families from company houses and lands. Guards swept through houses, tossing out miners' clothing and furniture. Others, with high-powered rifles, rounded up the strikers and their wives and children and removed them from company property. Shocked and homeless, the miners and their families had to find shelter wherever they could, in caves, tents, and improvised shacks. The union brought in food and additional tents, and in time, scores of tent colonies sprang up in the mountain hollows.
The coal operators felt totally justified in their actions, as bad as those actions seem to us today. The law was on their side. They had leases, they had contracts. The evictions took place after the miners were given notices to move. The coal operators offered to move their furniture where they wished. They offered them jobs in union mines elsewhere. They felt they had to have those houses in order to bring in new workers to keep the mines operating, which to them was the primary consideration. The trouble is that they just went too far. The Baldwin Felts detectives continuously harassed and intimidated the miners even after they had gone on strike, had left their company homes, and lived in tents in the community. They were hired professional strikebreakers, and that's what they had come in to do.
This company thugs is what you was. You couldn't go along the road without to stop and search you.
If three men got together, the big boss would tell them, y'all better break it up.
They was murderers. That's all it was. They kicked the people out of their houses.
Meanwhile, the coal bosses began to fortify themselves against possible retaliations. Barricades and concrete bunkers were built. Machine guns were purchased and placed in strategic locations. Floodlights searched the hillsides and main gates at night. Anxious to resume operations, the coal bosses posted ads in eastern cities for new workers. These they planned to transport in on specially guarded trains.
The operators felt they had to resort to stronger methods because this thing had taken on a scale the like of which they hadn't seen before. And for that reason, they used armored trains, a great deal many more mine guards, scabs, and whatever supplies, etc., were necessary to checkmate the miners' organization.
Outraged by the actions of the coal operators, union organizers, including the legendary Mother Jones, came to Paint and Cabin Creeks to rally the miners. More importantly, local leaders such as Bill Blizzard and Frank Keeney emerged from the ranks of the strikers. Miners themselves, they had had their fill of fear and intimidation. They were ready to fight back.
For decades, they had been cowed. The coal companies, and particularly Baldwin Felts mine guards, used terror to kind of intimidate the miners, terrorize them into submission. During this strike, when they encountered terrorism or the violence on a day-to-day basis, the miners themselves began to turn the table, turn the trick, you might say. They began to employ violence against the mine guards.
They bought guns for $1, $2, $3 apiece, frequently using union relief funds, and they took to the hills, and they were determined they were either going to drive these guards out or kill them.
Union miners north of Paint and Cabin Creeks, hearing about the fighting, knowing that a victory by the coal operators would jeopardize their own gains, took up arms and marched to the aid of their fellow miners. Within 24 hours, 6,000 had gathered at the headwaters of Cabin Creek, spoiling for a fight. Coal operators handed out guns to anyone on their side who could shoot. More barricades were built. More machine guns put in place. Both sides were primed and ready. Then, the governor stepped in.
The Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike would set the pattern for the road government and all succeeding strikes in West Virginia, at least coal strikes in West Virginia, until the New Deal of the 1930s. That would be the state government would try and stay out of the strike as long as it could, or as long as the coal companies were in control of the strike. With that strike, Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike, once the coal miners had turned the tide, that is, once the miners had started to gain control of the strike, or were on the verge of victory, the state government jumps in. You see the state governor declaring martial law and calling out the state troops to break the strike.
A military tribunal was set up, martial law was imposed, and arrests were made. And although some Baldwin Felts guards were indeed arrested and tried, most of the arrests involved striking miners. Then the coal operators began to bring in transportations, or scabs, workers from New York and Ohio and places like that. And when they came in, the militia protected them. This outraged the strikers, because here again they saw this was the end of it all. They would lose everything once those scabs came in and took their homes and their jobs.
During the bitter West Virginia winter, Paint and Cabin Creeks quieted. The strikers, still living in tents and shacks, faced other hardships. Many were near starvation. Children died from the cold.
It was awfully cold. People had to have a double top put on their tents in order to help to hold the snow off and keep them breaking down these tents. It was cold weather during that time. You had to wrap up awfully good.
In February of 1913, violence again flared. This time, an armored train, one used for transporting scab labor to the mining camps, was commandeered for a special night journey. With a coal operator, sheriff, and mine guards on board, the Bull Moose Special, as it was called, drove with its lights out through the valley of Holly Grove. As it approached a colony of strikers camped near the tracks, the mine guards opened fire.
Miraculously, only one person was killed. Cisco Estep was killed, and dozens were wounded. This miracle, only one person was killed. They got to the end of the line. The co-operator on the train, Quinn Morton, hollered, "Back it up, we'll give the sons of bitches another round." This was one of the times Baldwin Felt's mine guards showed a little humanity and would not let him do it.